If someone told you that Afghanistan is sexually open, you would probably think he's completely insane. I mean, we're talking about Afghanistan under the Taliban. Their morality law are some of the most extreme interpretation of Islam in the world. This isn't just about sex being restricted, even basic personal freedom barely exists. Women are banned from going to school, banned from working, banned from showing their faces. They're not even allowed to speak in public. If you break the rule, you could be stoned, you could lose your hands, or you could be beheaded. So, in a country where you can't even see a woman's face, how could something like a sex industry even exist? And it's not just about laws on people. Everything we take for granted, like rock music, EDM, bars, nightlives, all of it is illegal. Modern entertainment, completely banned. But here's where things get really interesting. Despite all of this, Afghanistan has quietly become a major exporter of sex work in Central Asia. And the main destination? Iran, a country that's only slightly less conservative. Hello everybody, I'm Tony. Today we're uncovering a side of Afghanistan that most people don't even know exists. A sexually open Afghanistan you were never supposed to see. We need to understand this first. Under Taliban law, sex work is punishable by death. And not just death, it's death by stoning. But in a country where nearly 95% of the population is struggling just to eat, at the bottom of society, many women simply cannot survive anymore. So when the only way to get food is to sell their own bodies, do you really think Taliban law can stop that? The short answer is no, it cannot, and it never will. When pressure comes from the top, people find ways around it at the bottom. The stricter the rules, the more creative the solutions become. And under that kind of extreme circumstances, Afghanistan has developed something very unusual, where the sex transaction itself often takes place in a third country. So what do I mean by that? Even when it's between two Afghans, the transaction often has to cross the border into neighboring countries like Iran. Over time, they even became the core of Iran's sex industry. And today, Afghans make up nearly 60% of it. And if you go to Mashhad, a border city between Iran and Afghanistan, you don't even have to look. Just standing on the street, Afghan sex workers will approach you and ask if you want services. And it's not just border towns. Even in central Iranian cities like Yazd, across the entire underground economy, from sex work to currency exchange black market, as much as 80% is controlled by Afghans. Afghan women crossing borders, selling their bodies in another country. At first glance, this might sound like some kind of sexual fantasy. But the truth is, this is a deeply tragic story. And to understand how Afghanistan's underground sex industry works, and why so many sex workers in Iran are Afghan women, we have to start with the complicated relationship between Afghanistan and Iran. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. 6 million Afghans lost their home and were displaced. That same year, Iran went through the Islamic Revolution. The Pahlavi dynasty collapsed and the Khomeini came to power. Under the banner of Islamic unity, Iran began accepting Afghan refugees. Within a short time, 3 million of Afghans poured into Iran. By 1989, the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, but peace never came. Instead, the country fell into years of warlord infighting. Then in 1994, the Taliban began to rise. Driven by religious extremism, they swept across the country, establishing an Islamic regime, and brutally persecuting Shia Muslims. As the leading Shia power, Iran had no choice but once again open its border. By 1996, there were already 5 million Afghan refugees in Iran. But here's a small problem. It's easy to let people in, and it's much harder to send them back. And when the Afghanistan population in Iran grew large enough to reshape the country's demographics, Iran started to panic. Just as Iran was figuring out how to deal with the situation, the United States handed them a gift. In 2001, the US entered Afghanistan. The Taliban was removed from power, and Iran seized the opportunity. Over the next 20 years, they forcibly deported 5 million Afghan refugees back to what was US-controlled Afghanistan. But here's the catch. During those 20 years, many Afghans in Iran had already built families. Some were already third generation. So even after deporting 5 million people, by 2020, there were still 3 million Afghans in Iran. But Iran was pretty happy, because 3 million is a lot, but it's much more manageable than 8 million people. But that relief did not last long. In 2021, the US withdrew from Afghanistan. The Taliban returned to power, and a new wave of fear swept the country. Afghanistan saw the largest exodus in its history. Those with money fled to Europe or the US, and those without, yes, they went right back to Iran. By 2023, the number of Afghan refugees in Iran had climbed back to 5 million. And that's just an official number. Independent estimates suggest the real number is closer to 10 million. To put that into perspective, Iran's total population is about 90 million. That means more than 1 in 10 people is Afghan, and about 45% of them are women. Many of them are widows of war. They don't have work permits, only temporary refugee cards. No stable income, no protection. So think about it. 4.5 million Afghan women in Iran, they don't have money, no husband, no job. How are they supposed to survive? And of course, there are always people who love to sit on their high horse and say they could just figure things out, or maybe even just begging. There is no excuse to sell their bodies. But the reality is, even begging isn't an option. In 2018, Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, and a wave of sanctions followed. Over the next 8 years, Iran's currency, the rial, lost 25 times of its value. The country was already struggling. Now it was collapsing. By 2025, the average monthly income in Iran is less than $150. Even Iranians themselves cannot find decent jobs. So what about Afghans? Afghan men can still do harsh manual labor, but Afghan women, at best, they get temporary domestic work. But here's another question. If even locals can find jobs, why would anyone hire Afghans? The answer is simple. They are cheap. For example, in a hotel in Yazd, a room service job for an Afghan woman pays around $100 a month. But here's the reality. That kind of money in Iran is nothing. You still have to survive, you still have to raise kids. It barely covers anything. And for many women, there is no real choice. They end up going into sex work, becoming part of Iran's underground sex industry. Now, just like Afghanistan, Iran also followed Islamic law. Legally, sex work can be punished by flogging, imprisonment, or fines. And here's an important difference. Iran is Shia Muslim. When it comes to sex, Shia law is nowhere near as extreme as what you see under the Taliban. In fact, there is a loophole. It's called temporary marriage. So what is that? To simply put, it allows a man and a woman to enter a short-term marriage and live as husband and wife. How short? It could be 1 day, it could be 10 years. And honestly, it's not hard to see what this really is. It's a workaround and a legal loophole. And this is not new either. Since the Safavid dynasty, temporary marriage has been used by the upper class for pleasure. Even today, you can still see it reflected in Persian miniature paintings. But here's the catch. For a temporary marriage to be legal, it has to be certified by a Shia cleric. Which means the only truly legitimate places that are offering this are the ones run by religious networks themselves. So most underground brothels simply use temporary marriage as a cover. And here's how it works. These places are usually located outside the city. If you are a client, you leave by 2 a.m. and driving without headlights, so you don't get noticed. The price? Around $150 per visit. Each time you are given 3 women to choose from. No photos provided beforehand, you choose on the spot. And typically, out of those 3, 2 are Afghan women, 1 is Iranian. And if you're a foreigner, you are not getting in without a local guide. This is the underground network. They are paranoid about being reported. Now you might be thinking, wait, isn't this supposed to be legal? Isn't this temporary marriage? So why are they hiding? Because at this price point, $150, most of the clerics proving these marriages are not real. Real certified temporary marriage institutions do exist in Iran, and they're actually quite common. But they're expensive, much more expensive, and they're usually aimed at high-end clients. So every business model runs on a chain of incentives, and the Afghanistan sex export industry is no different. Many Afghan women are pushed into this just to survive. But feeding off them are 2 parasites. On one side, traffickers tied to the Taliban. On the other, Iranian pimps. In 2020, BBC Persian published an investigation. Underground brothels in Tehran were detaining girls and forcing them into sex work. And many of these girls had been trafficked from Afghanistan. This entire pipeline has been exposed multiple times before, including by Iranian women's rights groups. And yet, it's still running today. Traffickers lure Afghan girls with promises of marriage, financial support, or job opportunities. They get them across the border, and once they arrive, their passports are immediately taken, and they are sold into underground brothels. As this system evolved, it split into two main operating models within Iran's sex industry. The centralized network centered around Tehran, and the border network centered around Mashhad. So let's start with the Mashhad model. Mashhad is one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam. It's home to the shrine of Imam Raza, which is the 8th Shia Imam. But on the ground, there's nothing holy about this city. Drug trafficking, robbery, underground brothels, all that exists here. And its location matters. Mashhad sits right next to Afghanistan, which makes it a natural hub for cross-border sex trade. Most of the workers here are Afghan. They have even formed informal networks, what some call the Black Shadow Sisterhood. Using pilgrimage routes as cover, they have created a new kind of business model. Religious travel combined with the sexual services. Here's how it works. A pilgrimage package typically includes a hotel stay, visit to holy sites, and a temporary wife as a companion. Clients usually find these services through apps like Telegrams or WhatsApp. They browse photos, contact middlemen, and arrange a temporary marriage. And let's be honest, this is something next level. Pilgrimage on one side, prostitution on the other. So you have to ask, do these people actually believe in the religion they claim to follow? Because if they did, where's the sense of reverence? And here's the irony. The main customers fall into two groups. Border forces linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard and the Taliban fighters. Why them? Because they're the only ones who have money. Ordinary Iranians are struggling just to eat. And in recent years, there has been another group. Pilgrims from neighboring countries like Iraq. Because the Iranian rial has collapsed, for anyone holding foreign currency, those services has become incredibly cheap. Now you might be wondering, how do they dare to serve Taliban fighters? Wouldn't they just get arrested? So here's the twist. In Iran, dealing with Taliban fighters is actually the safest option. Because if anything gets exposed, yes, the sex worker will be executed, but the Taliban fighter, he goes down as well. And when you think about it, the irony is almost absurd. Both the buyer and the sellers are Afghan. And yet, because of the Taliban's extreme sexual repression, their own soldiers have to travel across the border into Iran just to find Afghan women to satisfy their needs. And that's not all. They claim to stand for pure Islam, but in reality, they are the ones running the whole thing. And here's how it works. The so-called Black Shadow Sisterhood operates with one key advantage: mobility. Today in Iran, tomorrow back in Afghanistan. Moving back and forth across the border. And think about it. If they were doing this without protection, would they really be able to move this freely? The truth is, these networks along the borders are largely enabled, and in many cases organized by the Taliban themselves. Without that protection, this system simply wouldn't exist at this scale. Now the border model is popular, but at the end of the day, the market there is just too small. The real market, the biggest market, is in Tehran. When it comes to Tehran underground sex industry, it's basically the Phuket of the Middle East. It's highly developed, highly organized. And because Shia law requires temporary marriages to be certified by a cleric, you have a large number of clerics directly involved in the system. In fact, some of them already know what they are going to do before they even enter seminary. They are planning to come out and certify these operations. Why? Because in today's Iran, outside of oil, this is one of the most profitable businesses there is. And let's be honest, not everyone gets to sell oil. Within the industry, communication usually happens through encrypted apps such as Telegram and WhatsApp. And they all use coded language, something like rose service, night care. You hear it, you know exactly what it means. But what really makes this system mature is that it has evolved into different tiers. So there are basically three tiers: the high-end, mid-tier, and the low-end. The high-end market is concentrated in northern Tehran, the wealthy district. Services are usually provided in private clubs. Prices are steep, at least $300 per session, sometimes over $1,000. And at this level, the temporary marriages are typically certified by legitimate clerics. Now you might ask, with Iran's economy in this condition, how could anyone even afford this? The answer? Plenty of people. This market caters to high-ranking members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the country's political elites. Through political connections, they gain access to exclusive trade opportunities, like oil exports, and those people have accumulated massive wealth over the years. So money isn't really the issue, they are after the best service. At the other end, the low-end market is mostly in southern neighborhoods. Southern Tehran traditionally has been the industrial part of the city. Unlike the upscale clubs in the wealthy north, the south is filled with factories, construction sites, and the working-class neighborhoods. So the main customer here are local laborers at the bottom of the income ladder. And the women providing these services are usually over 30, many of them are Iranian, divorced or widowed, having lost their financial support. And of course, the rest are Afghan women. There are no fixed locations, mostly just street-based workers. And the prices are very low, usually between $10 and $50. The mid-tier market, which we mentioned earlier, typically operates through underground brothels. Prices are around $150. Some people would assume Afghan women are mostly in the mid and the low tiers, but that's actually not true. Even in the high-end market, Afghan women make up a significant portion. Because let's be honest, in this industry, it's not about nationality. What matters is all about looks. In Tehran's underground sex industry, over 60% of sex workers are Afghan women. But here's something most people don't realize. When a single transaction in the high-end market ranges from $300 to $1,000, you would think that money would change lives. Because $1,000 in Afghanistan can support a family for an entire year. So in theory, just a few months of work could make someone wealthy. But that's not what happens here, because the sex workers never see that money. In reality, 90%, sometimes even 95% goes to pimps and clerics. In the high-end markets, these middlemen are extremely powerful. The women have zero bargaining power. Ironically, in the mid and low tiers, pimps take less, only around 20%. These Afghan women push into sex work have no dignity, no rights, and no protection, not even something as basic as condom. According to Doctors Without Borders, the HIV infection rate among Afghan sex workers is around 8%, compared to just 0.1% in Iran's general population. Most of these women are between 18 and 35. Many of them are married. They are living on the edge of law and morality, selling their bodies just to survive. But is this a moral failure on their part? I don't think so. War has shattered Afghanistan. It displaced millions. The Taliban stripped women of the right to work, the right to education, forcing them to rely on men just to survive. Do they not want to work with their own hands? Do they not want to live with dignity? Of course they do. But poverty pushed them into desperation. And in the end, this is where they end up. Afghanistan's sex exports are not just the tragedy of these women, they are the tragedy of an entire country. A country torn apart by war, and now ruled by one of the most extreme religious regimes in modern history. But this is what I believe. You can enforce a system with violence, but if that system goes against human nature, it won't last. Desire does not disappear. You cannot suppress it forever. And yet, regimes like the Taliban keep trying to control human nature with bullets. But the problem is, can they? Because under this kind of rule, the irony is impossible to ignore. Afghanistan has become a major exporter in the sex trade, and that industry now surrounds the country like a border of desire, wrapping around this so-called pure Islamic state. This is a regime that sends children to war and turns young girls into weapons. A regime that treats sex as something evil and punishes sex workers with death. And yet, the same men who enforce these rules are also the ones fueling the system. They are the customers, sometimes even the organizers. This regime does not fear guns, but it fears something else: a pen, a book, a classroom. Because it knows education will end its rule. And in the end, a system built on violence will always collapse under its own weight. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, comment, hype, and subscribe. With that, I will see you in the next one.